Hey Internet, hey YouTube, this is Nate. You can also call me Nathan, but please never call me Nathaniel. And welcome to my guide to every Monster Train champion. This is the final part. We are almost through all the champions. We have Solgard, Primordium, and Little Fade left. This will be part 4 slash part 2 if you just look at Exile champions. Yeah, I hope you guys have been enjoying the series. If you have and you have not yet subscribed, it really helps me out, so go ahead if you haven't. And if you have already, appreciate your support. Yeah, we're not going to do explaining the setup. If you want to see how the setup is working in these guides, check out parts 1 and 3 linked in the description. We will jump right into it, starting with Solgard the Martyr. It is the Stygian Guard Exile champion with the following lore. For the first time, I've spoken with these dream beings. Solgard, the priest of the Stygians' Titan, spoke of a mass exodus of martyrs who gave up their souls for the sake of heaven and hell. But why does no one living know of this great sacrifice? These answers only create more questions. From a design, so he's kind of like a priest, which kind of fits this idea of him incanting. So every version of Solgard incants to gain shards, and then those shards have different effects depending on which upgrade path you pick. So let's look at that from the perspective of gameplay. He has 3 different upgrade paths, or it has. I don't know if Solgard has a gender, but if he does, or it does, let me know. But regardless, 3 different upgrade paths. The first is Direchannel, which is the shards deal damage to the front enemy unit as part of an action. And action means right before you attack. So if you are relentless every single time your champion would attack, they do this action trigger first. Second, you have Coldchannel. Coldchannel, the shards act as a revenge trigger. So on revenge, apply Frostbite 2 per shard to enemy units. And finally, Titanchannel. Titanchannel comes in phased, meaning that it can't be attacked, it can't attack, and it cannot have anything target it, including spells. And it has incant gain 1 shard. Once Solgard has at least the requisite number of shards, then it removes phased and can be attacked, and be targeted. So very interesting, this idea of fully incanting to gain powers and then unleashing those powers based on which upgrade path you pick. So kind of cool, really neat design. Jumping into the first upgrade path, Direchannel. Direchannel has text, incant gain 1 shard, and on action deal 3 damage per shard to the front enemy unit. It is a 0 damage 10 health unit. At rank 2, the health doubles to 20 health, and the action trigger increases from 3 damage per shard to 5 damage per shard. At rank 3, the health doubles again, going from 20 health to 40 health, and the action trigger increases from 5 damage per shard to 7 damage per shard. Looking at the SWOT analysis, Direchannel has very, very high scaling burst damage. You can really get insane numbers. If you even think of just doing like 20 incants, that's already 140 damage per action trigger, which is really kind of cool. As well, the damage that Direchannel does is immune to sap, cleanse, and spikes because none of those things affect the shard count, and it's a text trigger. So you can't sap the damage, you can't cleanse the shards, and as well, if you hit something with spikes, it doesn't do anything because you're not actually attacking, it's an action trigger. In terms of weaknesses, no base damage, so there's no actual attacking. It also has very low base health, especially at rank 1 and 2. And no innate backline access and no innate sustain. It's quite a flimsy version of Solgard compared to the others. In terms of opportunities, pretty moderate benefit from Quick. Quick does enable the action trigger to happen before the enemy's attack, which can be beneficial sometimes. There's moderate benefit from rage and damage buffs. What ends up happening is that the action trigger always happens first, so you can kind of get a little bit of a multi-strike effect in that you can have the action trigger go off and then Solgard will actually attack afterward, which can be kind of cool as a way to kill the front enemy unit with the burst of the action and then hit a backliner with the attack afterward. Can work. And then obviously really high synergy with other incant units. You're already going to be incanting a lot, so then putting other incant units on the same floor, you're going to benefit all of them at the same time. In terms of sustain, damage, shield, and armor are going to be much better because of the low health total and 0 damage. Regen is going to be slightly better than lifesteal, which is complete trash because you don't attack. In terms of threats, it's very weak to sweep at rank 1 and 2. It's actually not weak to spikes because the action trigger doesn't apply or doesn't cause any spike damage to hit Solgard. It also is quite weak to high damage backline units because there's no backline access. Other threats include Seraph the Patient's Rally trigger. That's actually wrong. That should say Incant trigger. So it's Seraph the Patient's Incant trigger and Seraph the Diligent's Consume and Blight effects, both of which inhibit your ability to incant. In terms of the role of Direchannel, it's a low health scaling damage carry. So at rank 1, the damage isn't going to get that high. Even at like 20 incants, you're only talking about 60 damage, which isn't insane. But at ranks 2 and 3, it can really get crazy. Certainly enough to kill most frontline units, and it's going to do a lot of damage to bosses as long as you have some form of tank or sustain. As it relies on incants to scale and is particularly vulnerable, you're going to want to put Solgard in the back and on the top. That gives you plenty of time and prevents Solgard from getting hit by front enemy units. And again, as I mentioned, due to the nature of the action trigger, if you can do quick, you can get a quick burst of damage before the enemy attacks, and you can do this kind of multi-strike effect if you have any damage buffs onto Solgard. Looking at deck building, priority units are going to be all of your standard incants. Siren of the Sea, Guardian Stone, Guard of the Unnamed. This would be Guard of the Unnamed, not Guardian of the Unnamed. Sorry about that. Guard of the Unnamed, Lodestone Totem, Titan Sentry, Offering Monument. Titan Sentry works well because it has backline access, even though it's not an incant unit. If you get Titan Sentry, you're going to want at least some other form of sustain, like a Guardian Stone or Endless. Alternatively, you can put Titan Sentry on a separate floor and then have your incant floor on a higher floor and use something like Siren of the Sea, Guard of the Unnamed. And then Offering Monument's always going to be really good in builds like this where you want to incant a lot. Priority spells, Offering Token, Frenzied Swarm. You're not really looking to absorb damage, so Daze is quite good here. And then after that, it's really AoE with Titan's Tooth and Ice Storm. Guardian's Amulet can also be very useful as a way to prevent damage. Spike of the Stygian, the same thing, and as well giving some Frostbite onto the unit that is sapped. So it's really about getting a lot of incants, but then also dealing with AoE and preventing damage as much as possible. In terms of artifacts, Founding Seal is always going to be the top priority with any incant build. Afterwards, Kinstone Totem tends to be pretty good. It's not so great with Frenzied Swarm, but with other discards, it's very good. Light's Gift as a way to play up on the top floor without ever having to worry about taking damage on Solgard until the Relentless fight. And then Winged Steel as another way to get more spells out. Looking at secondary clans, starting with Hellhorned. Again, we're looking for things that are going to be good blockers for Solgard. So Demon Fiend has pretty good health. Welder Helper is a way to grant sustain onto any unit. And then Steelworker. To be fair, Steelworker is not particularly great in general, but it can work as a front tank because it does have its resolve trigger. Looking at spells, it's all about sustain and AoE. So Alloy of the Ancients, Fortify, Martyr Shields for your sustain, and then Vent for your AoE. For artifacts, you want to increase the value of that sustain with a Railhammer. Of course, don't get Railhammer if you don't have any armor. But if you do have armor, Railhammer is going to be really good. And then Consumed Crown. So Consumed Crown does allow you to get some damage scaling onto Solgard because the action trigger does trigger Slays. So then after the action trigger, you kill an enemy unit, and then Solgard gets a little bit of damage, which then helps to scale up even further. Kind of a neat little interaction. Looking at Awoken, Vine Mother is going to be your priority, and this is true of all three Solgard builds. Vine Mother is amazing because you get free incants and draw, both of which help to get more incants. After that, you want AoE, so Husk Hermit, Thorn Hollow, and you want AoE that has pretty good tankiness, which is why I didn't include, what is it called? The other sweep unit. Can't think of the name right now. But yeah, so you want something that can hit the back line and can tank for you. Thorn Hollow has an asterisk because you really actually need to have regen to get Thorn Hollow to work. Either regen or strong restore. And if you don't have it, you'll struggle. So only take it if you have restore or regen available. In terms of spells, number 1, Preserve Thorns is amazing. Preserve Thorns is 4 incants and 1 card. And it gives you 3 draw for the next turn. Really fantastic. After that, Root Seeds. So you're hoping for Exile Awoken, typically when you're doing Solgard builds. Glimmer for AoE, and then Wildwood Tome to get quick onto Solgard or another unit that can take advantage of quick, like a sweep unit or something like that. For artifacts, Thorn Fruit tends to be really good, giving you that free sting each turn, and then Emblem of Exiles to increase the health on the front unit, the tank. Umbra, Shadow Eater. You want AoE? Shadow Eater does AoE very reliably. In order to get Shadow Eater on the same floor as the Solgard, you will need to increase capacity by 1 so that you can fit a gorge, you can fit a morsel to gorge. Otherwise, you can go with Crucible Collector, Crucible Warden. You don't need the extra space in that case. And then you just want to have something that can sustain and do potentially AoE as well. In terms of spells, Space Prism, increase the capacity on the floor. Grovel, which you can use to give damage shield to Solgard and then create morsels. Packed morsels just to get some easy morsels out, and Wretch to get even more morsels. It's all about gorging. And the nice thing about a lot of these are that they are free, making incanting much easier. For artifacts, Mind Jacks, Fossilized Fangs, anything to increase space so that you can gorge more and take more advantage of the gorge with Fossilized Fangs doubling the gorge triggers. And what you can also do here is you can have a 2-floor setup with Umbra where you have Solgard plus some incanters on one floor. You cast your morsel generation on that floor, and then you play your morsels on a separate floor. That also works just fine. So you don't have to put them all on the same floor. You can have a 2-floor setup that works rather well. Finally, Melting Remnant, priority units, Molten Encasement for the stealth triggers on Extinguish. Legion of Wax, just getting a big, thick body in front of Solgard, although you will have to increase capacity or find a way to manipulate floors in order to get them on the same floor. Lady of the Reformed is quite tanky. Lady of the House is quite tanky, although just be aware with Lady of the House, you will need some way to either bring her back or increase her burnout to have her tank effectively for Solgard. For spells, Engulfed in Smoke, getting even more stealth. Yeah, that's going to be really good. It's an incant, plus it protects Solgard from getting hit. Molded to bring back Legion of Wax, Lady of the Reformed, Lady of the House. Primitive Mold for the same reason. And then for artifacts, Waxer Snuffer to get double Extinguish triggers off of your Molten Encasement, Legion of Wax, Entombed Explosion, any of those. And then Exploding Candle helps you to get some AoE off of your burnout units if you have burnout units that are dying. So if you have a Molten Encasement that has burnout 1 and endless, it's going to do AoE as well as provide stealth, which can become really valuable. Same with Legion of Wax. If you have Legion of Wax reformed once, now every time one of the parts of the Legion of Wax dies, it does an AoE effect. So all this is going to be really good for helping to make sure backliners aren't making it to your pyre. And in general, the whole build is about making sure you have backline access, getting enough incant triggers, and then having something to tank for Solgard. If you have all those pieces in place, you're going to do really well. Coldchannel. Coldchannel has text, incant, gain 1 shard on revenge, apply 1 frostbite per shard to enemy units. It is a 0 damage, 15 health unit. At rank 2, the health dramatically increases from 15 to 50 health, although the incant doesn't change. And then at rank 3, the incant doubles, applying 2 frostbite per shard instead of 1, and the health increases again to 70. Very odd progression, to be honest. But let's look at the SWAT for Coldchannel. Strengths, very, very high damage potential on bosses. It's very easy to scale up a lot of frostbite assuming you can get enough revenge triggers with enough sustain. You have an 8 backline access because the revenge applies to all units on the floor, similar to Titan Sentry. It has very high base health at rank 3, not at rank 1 and 2. That's where it's kind of tricky. And then the damage that it provides is immune to sap and spikes because it's applied on revenge, not applied because of actual attacking. For weaknesses, no base damage, so you have to actually get hit to do any damage with this Solgard. Very low base health at rank 1, and no innate sustain. For opportunities, really high synergy with Frostbite relics and spells, really high synergy as well with incant units. I didn't have it listed here, but also really high synergy with incanters. In terms of sustain, it's kind of weird. At rank 1, you really want to prioritize damage shield plus armor because you have such low health totals. The only issue is with damage shield, it gets a little weird because damage shield prevents the revenge triggers from going off, but you may decide that that's an okay trade in some cases in order to save Solgard for Relentless, so you have to kind of decide there. But then, yeah, regen and lifesteal are going to be pretty bad. At rank 3, it swaps because now you have a high health total. Regen's going to be the best for you. I think it should be regen, then armor, then damage shield, then lifesteal. Lifesteal's complete garbage because you don't actually attack. Looking at threats, it's very weak to sweep at rank 1. After that, it's not too big of a deal. High health frontliners can be really problematic because you don't get a lot of revenge triggers usually on normal floors, maybe 2 or 3, and that might not be enough to actually kill the front line. So you need something that can do burst damage. Seraph the Patient's incant trigger can be a real problem, like we talked about with Direchannel. Seraph the Diligent's Consume for the same reason. And Seraph the Chasted's Cleanse effect, because Seraph the Chaste will cleanse its own and other units' frostbite. Jumping into tactical tips. So Coldchannel Solgard is a tank/damage hybrid unit, which relies on its revenge triggers to kill the backline, as well as stack frostbite onto high health units and bosses. At rank 1, it's really tricky to know where to put Solgard. You kind of have to decide what's your priority in the first few rings. Do you want to save Solgard for the boss, or do you want to use Solgard as a way to eliminate backliners? Probably you can't get both. So pick one unless you have really good sustain as starter cards. At rank 2 or 3, you absolutely want to put Solgard in the front as a tank. Coldchannel relies on getting solid frontline damage, so you're going to need something, either units or spells that can hit the front line, and then you need very reliable sustain. The builds tend to struggle in the first few rings, but then it gets much better once you get to rank 2 and you have a lot of health. Building Coldchannel decks, priority is Offering Monument. You want to get as much incanting as you can as early as you can. Siren of the Sea tends to be really good. Nameless Siren tends to be really good. You put them in the back line. Guardian Stone as a way to get armor onto Solgard as well as onto the backliners. Glacial Seal is quite good for increasing the frostbite even further. And Cold Celia is quite good to increase the stacks of frostbite even more. There's not really a lot of good frontline burst units apart from the 2 Sirens. So then it's just adding as much frostbite as possible. For spells, Offering Monument, again, trying to get as many incants as you possibly can. Hoarfrost Effigy for flying boss kills or even regular boss kills can be really, really valuable. And then it's about really stacking a lot of frostbite and doing burst damage. Crypt Builder is going to be your best pick, especially if you have Offering Monument. After that, Ice and Pyre if you're playing in the top floor, and Ancient Synergy as well. Just be aware that Ancient Synergy, it can restrict your incanting if you don't lower the cost. So it's a priority spell to get down to 1 cost. Or get some type of relic. For example, the Anvil to reduce, or to play Ancient Synergy and then have all the rest of the spells free. Anyway, moving on to the priority artifacts. Founding Seal, of course, if you want incanting, Founding Seal becomes really valuable. Cuddlebeard to make the Revenge trigger that much stronger and to also reduce the fall off of frostbite damage. Kinstone Totem to get Ember every time you discard something. So it's especially good with Offering Monument. And yeah, I mean your default spells as well, discard. And then Wing Steel to get even more incants. You play 3 cards, you get a third draw, or you get a new draw. So anything you can do to get more incants is going to help. Looking at the other clans, secondary clans with Hellhorn, it's a mix of getting sustain and solid damage. Alpha Fiend tends to be pretty good in these builds later on because you have a pretty solid tank, and Alpha Fiend will continue to scale during the fights. Consumer of Crowns is also very good, but then you really need to make sure you have enough imps to be able to reliably get Consumer of Crowns out. And then, yeah, Welder Helper is really just there to get armor onto Solgard, to make sure you have plenty of revenge triggers that you can apply. Spells, Branding Right's amazing. Branding Right doubles as both a revenge trigger because when you damage Solgard, then it triggers revenge on all the enemy units. And it gives sustain with the extra armor. So fantastic spell. After that, it's just anything you can do to get sustain. Alloy of the Ancients, Fortify, March of Shields. There's not really very good burst damage spells in Hellhorn, so you're really relying on your units to get that burst damage. For artifacts, Railhammer, anything you can do to increase sustain is going to be good, and Railhammer increases the sustain on all of the armor-related spells and artifacts. And then Gurg's Goad. Gurg's Goad is really good for Alpha Fiend. It's really good for Consumer of Crowns. Really, any of the demons are going to benefit if you can get the multi-strike. Helps out with killing those frontliners. For Awoken, again, priority Vine Mother, and then after that, you want to switch to damage dealers. That's Animus of Will and Animus of Speed. You don't really need Sweep because you have the Revenge trigger, so Animus of Speed tends to be better than the Sweep units in this case. For spells, then, Preserve Thorns, still going to be amazing. Root Seeds to scale the damage on your Animus, especially Animus of Will. Awake and Wildwood Sap to get regen onto Solgard, and then for artifacts, Emblem of the Exiles to get that 5 extra health per turn, and Thorn Fruit to get free incants and draw. Other spells you can also consider, since you have likely one of the Animus, is to get Razor Sharp Edge and Steel Enhancer, but I would still say getting the sustain onto Solgard, I would put priority even over the scalability of Animus of Will. For Umbra, you really just want a big damage dealer, so Overgorger tends to work really well. And the way that I tend to do it is you have a 2-floor setup, right? So you have your incant floor where you're generating morsels, and then you have your gorge floor with like an Overgorger or a Crucible Ward and Crucible Collector where you're utilizing those morsels. If you don't want to generate morsels with spells, then getting the Morsel Master, Morsel Maker can help get more morsels without having to generate them with your spells. And then if you can get Shadow Siege, get it. Yeah, if you have a way to get Shadow Siege out, you have Perils of Production with Frostbite or with Permafrost or Holdover, or if you have some other way of generating Ember, then do it. For spells, it's all about burst, so Blazing Bolts tends to be really, really good in these builds, especially if you can get it down to 1 cost. After that, then it's about good incants that also help with gorging. So Space Prism, Wretch, Packed Morsels, 0-cost spells that give you more space to put morsels and allow you to create morsels. For artifacts, space is key. I mean, anytime you have incant builds, having more space is huge because it means you can fit that many more incant units on the same floor, taking more advantage of your incants. So Mind Jacks is going to be really big there, and then Fossilized Fangs as a way to double your Gorge triggers. And Melting Remnant. Here, I really like doing a combination of your incant with a harvest unit. So Big Sludge, Wickless Baron, their damage scales really well if you get a lot of harvest triggers. And as you have the AoE built in with Coldchannel, then putting like a Big Sludge behind will scale that up very quickly. Alternatively, something like a Bounty Stalker can also work really well because Bounty Stalker, not so good in the early game, but late game can help get those high damage numbers that you need to kill like Fel, Arcus, and Seraph. For spells, Purifying Cleanse can work quite well if you get holdover on it. It will give you more than enough burnout, so you're not going to have to worry about dying from burnout. It's a 0-cost spell, and it will heal Solgard every time it gets hit. After that, Crushing Demise as a way to get rid of leaks, so units that leak past the first floor or the floor where you have your units. then you can use Crushing Demise to pick them off. Wicklash also tends to be really good on any of your backliners. You wouldn't use it on Solgard. You would just use it as a way to increase damage on your Big Sludge, Wickless Baron, or Bounty Stalker. For artifacts, Waxer Snuffer to increase the scaling on Bounty Stalker, or if you get Waxer Snuffer, you can also consider other types of extinguished units. Not really Molten Encasement because you don't really want stealth, but like an Entombed Explosive can be quite good with Waxer Snuffer or a Legion of Wax. And then Fade's First Blade as a way to increase, and you can actually then get some rage scaling onto Solgard, and Solgard can actually do damage to the front enemy units as well as the AoE from the Revenge. And, oh wait, before I jump into that, let me talk about in general. So again, you want burst damage and sustain. So whatever's going to help with burst damage and sustain is going to be your friend. Focus on those, and you could be really successful. Coldchannel tends to be very easy once you get past ring 4, or actually ring 3, and you get that second upgrade. And then it's just making sure you can kill the frontline units so they don't make it to the pyre and kill you. And last of the Solgard builds, or Solgard upgrade paths, is Titanchannel. Titanchannel has text or phased. So phased, you come out, you can't attack, you can't be attacked, you can't get targeted by any spells. Incant, gain 1 shard. If Solgard has at least 4 stacks, it should say at least, but it has 4 stacks or more, remove phased. It's a 45 damage, 45 health unit. At rank 2, the health and damage double, and the stacks required more than double. You now need 10 stacks in order to remove phased. At rank 3, the health and damage more than double to 210 health and damage, and the stacks increase from 10 to 15. So you can already see clearly rank 3 of Solgard here is a huge improvement over rank 2, even if the requirement becomes a little bit higher. Looking at the SWAT, very high base damage. In fact, the highest base damage unit in the game, and the highest base health unit in the game, even higher than Shadow Siege. Also, you can avoid any status effects and damage while a Titanchannel Solgard is phased. In terms of weaknesses, no innate backline access, no innate damage scaling, no innate sustain, and it cannot attack or defend while phased. The other thing that's it's a side weakness, but just to make you aware, innate buffs do not get applied when you play Solgard, or Titanchannel Solgard. That means if you have any summon triggers, any summon-based relics, they do not get applied. If you have any... basically that's it, right? If you have like rage on play, extra health on play, any of those, none of those get applied because you're phased, so you can't apply anything when you play the unit. That also works on the positive. If there are any negative effects, like sap, they don't get applied. Similar with daze on the top floor, it doesn't get applied because you can't apply any status effects to a phased unit. Opportunities. Really high benefit from multi-strike once Titanchannel is no longer phased. Similar with Trample. Pretty moderate benefit with Quick. You don't really need to avoid that much damage once you finally get Titanchannel Solgard phased or out of the phased. And then it's lifesteal, going to be better than regen, going to be better than damage, shield, and armor because of the high damage and high health. Looking at threats, biggest threat is not enough incants. If you don't get enough incants and you stay phased, oh boy, you're going to start leaking units, especially high damage backline units. Typically, you are relying to a certain extent on Titanchannel Solgard in order to kill the front line and let your other units kill the back line. And if you can't incant fast enough, you're just not going to have enough damage. Outside of that, Seraph the Patience incant triggers, as we discussed before, and Seraph the Diligence consume triggers. For the same reason, they are bad for any type of incant builds. Looking at tactical tips, Titanchannel Solgard is a tank damage carry hybrid. Due to the nature of phase, it can be one of the most complicated champions to work around because there's a high investment and then no further payout. Once you're phased, incanting doesn't do anything for Solgard. So it's this really weird thing where you want to incant really, really fast and then you don't care anymore. And that can be a little bit tricky to work around. As Titanchannel has a large base health, you typically want it in the front line. But, I mean, if you have another tank, you can put it in the back line, especially if you have a tank that's going to do AoE like Titan Sentry or something like that, or a sweep unit. You can put them in the front. But I would say normally you put Titanchannel in the front. In my experience, this is just my experience, but I find if you build Solgard to be basically your relentless killer, you're going to have more success. If you try to make Solgard as your frontline burst, it can be really difficult because then if you don't get enough incants, you just lose. So I think you need to build your deck expecting that you're going to need support both for burst and backline access. If you build your deck that way, you're going to have more success. And then Solgard is there kind of as like sustain or just a massive amount of damage and sustain you can add at the end for Relentless. So how do you build then? For me, it's all of the main incanters. Siren of the Sea, Nameless Siren, Offering Monument to increase your incanting, Glacial Seal for AoE, Lodestone to reduce the damage of the enemy units, and Titan Sentry to do clearing. For spells, again, Offering Token, really good incant-based spell. Crypt Builder to do frontline burst. Titan's Tooth for AoE. Guardian's Amulet to make the entire floor do less damage. Frenzied Swarm to make the entire floor do no damage. And I really actually, and I almost think this might be better as like 1 or 2. Siren Song is fantastic in this build because you can just ignore units. If you get a holdover on Siren Song, you just don't worry about it. Toss them up to the pyre, give your Solgard all the time in the world to get out of its cocoon, and then wreck them during Relentless. That's a fantastic way to build this deck. If you can't get Siren Song, get holdover, I highly recommend it. For artifacts, Founding Seal, you might think, well, wait, but after it's incanted, then, you know, you don't have it, and why do you need incants at that point? Which is true, but having the Founding Seal means you'll get to where Solgard becomes relevant much earlier. And then after that, it's basically the same stuff. Kinstone Totem to get Ember off your discard cards, Light's Gift to stun or daze units on the top floor, and then Wing Steel to draw after you've played 3 cards. Looking at secondary clans, starting with Hellhorn. Again, you just want big, bulky units that can help while Solgard channels itself into play. So Demon Fiend, Alpha Fiend, Consumer of Crowns. With Consumer of Crowns, again, make sure you have proper imp support, but if you do, then get Consumer of Crowns. For spells, I love Inferno. So there's a way you could play this where you just get Inferno, -1 cost and holdover, and you just Inferno, 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 as well as some light incanting on the side. And then because Inferno only hits non-phased units, you can't hit Solgard with your Inferno. And then once Solgard is phased, you don't have to worry about playing Inferno anymore. You let it continue on, and you get to your other incant cards instead. Or you get things like Vent. Tiresome Climb also works really well in a similar way like the Siren Song does. For artifacts, if you're going to take demons, Gurg's Goad's always going to be really good. And then the Unbroken Horn tends to be really good. If you do this incant setup, like I mentioned with Inferno, you can start scaling up Ember so that at the end you can play some higher cost Ember spells to incant a lot when you're ready to go Relentless. For Awoken, same story like Coldchannel. You want Vine Mother, Animus of Will. I also quite like Shattered Shell in this build. What you can do is you can get your, if you, for example, have Exile Awoken, you can take your Root Seeds, build up your Animus of Will, which is also then incanting your Solgard, getting them ready to come alive. And for Animus of Will and Shattered Shell, that becomes really valuable. After that, Preserve Thorns, obviously for spells, is going to be really good. It's 4 incants in 1. Wildwood Tome, and then you can decide what's your priority. Do you want Wildwood Tome on your Solgard, or do you want Wildwood Tome on like Shattered Shell or Animus of Will? Getting that quick effect tends to be really, really good. And after that, it's just things that are going to scale your damage dealer. Razor Sharp Edge, Steel Enhancer. Of course, you can play them on Solgard, but typically you're going to put them on your backliner who's doing damage. For artifacts, Thorn Fruit to get free incants, and then Emblem of Exiles to increase health on the front enemy unit or friendly unit. Certainly, Solgard's not going to get those at the beginning, but once you finally get out of phased, then you'll start getting those Emblem of Exile health bonuses. For Umbra, AoE, big damage. Shadow Eater, Crucible Collector, Crucible Warden. You can also do Overgorger if you want. The only issue with Overgorger is that the low health total can be a little bit problematic when you don't have other units to support, because your champion's basically not a unit until you've incanted enough. And then you do a similar setup where you have an incant floor and then a gorge floor. And I don't list the gorge spells, but of course if you have a major gorger, take the morsel generation stuff. So yeah. But in terms of other spells, Furnace Tap tends to be really good. Umbra Stone tends to be really good. You get Permafrost on them, so you can hold them until Solgard comes alive. And you think about that with a 210 damage unit, Umbra Stone's going to kill everything. Furnace Tap on a 210 damage unit's also really good. Space Prism to fit more units in. As we talked about with incanting, the more units, the better. And then Immortal Trade as your sustain. For artifacts, Mind Jacks to get more units on the same floor, and then Fossilized Fangs as a way to double your Gorge triggers. And last, Melting Remnants. Priority units. Anything that's going to do a lot of damage and help you be able to deal with units until Solgard comes alive is going to be good for you. So here, Bounty Stalker, obviously really, really good. It's a way to scale and have something that can kill units while you wait for your Solgard to come alive. Wickless Baron is quite good if you have a solid setup to kill backline units and harvest off of them. Big Sledge is the same. And then Entombed Explosive or Conceal Molten Concealment are both really good as a way to improve the harvesting as well as protect those units. For spells, Molded is going to be really good. And the nice thing about molding and primitive mold and all these is that you can play them on the floor with your incant floor and then place the units back on your harvest floor. And that's normally what I would do with Melting Remnant. You have a 2-floor setup, harvest floor and an incant floor. So then, yeah, all those are going to be quite good. Intent on Death can be really good if you have Bounty Stalker or any of the Tomb units, or even Legion of Wax. And then for priority artifacts, Waxer Snuffer for the same reason as Intent on Death. And then Flicker's Liquor. I mean, if you're going to have a harvest floor, being able to bring back units and play them again and bring them back and play them again means you're going to get a lot of free spells out. And especially because Stygian Guard tends to have a lot of high-cost spells, Flicker's Liquor is going to give you a lot of value there. And so in general, again, you kind of want to build as if you don't have Solgard and then use Solgard as Relentless, or find a way to incant fast enough to get Solgard as a frontline damage unit and then have something to pick off backliners. So I would say in terms of what I would want on top of Solgard, AoE is a little bit more important than burst damage because Solgard eventually can do burst damage. But in general, you just want to kind of plan for both. And then once Solgard comes alive, then you're fine. All right, so enough about the different builds. Let's talk about the overall champion and flexing and my personal rankings. So Solgard is actually quite a good flex champion. Coldchannel is probably the exception, where Coldchannel you really want to go all the way to rank 3. Getting that double Frostbite incant is so good. It's so good. Going from 1 Frostbite to 2 Frostbite per shard. So that's probably the one exception. But outside of that, Titanchannel can be flexed easily into Direchannel as a way to give you more tankiness and damage. It's that multi-strike effect I mentioned. And the 2 extra damage per shard, it can stack up really well. But honestly, having this multi-strike effect in my play testing tends to be much more effective because you're able to typically kill 2 units rather than just 1. Plus, you get a lot more sustain with that extra, 40 health you're getting from the Titanchannel rank 1. And you only have to incant 4 times. So it's really easy to get Titanchannel, Direchannel alive in this case. And then I would highly recommend considering mixing Coldchannel into Titanchannel. Even though rank 3 Titanchannel has insanely good stats, adding 1 rank of Coldchannel means solid backline damage. So if you have any form of sustain, if you have regen, if you have lifesteal, if you have armor or damage shield, Okay, maybe not damage shield, but all the rest. If you have armor, regen, or lifesteal, getting 1 rank of Coldchannel means basically you don't have to worry about the backline anymore. So highly recommend considering that. My personal rankings, I think Coldchannel and Direchannel are much easier to build around than Titanchannel. So this is not a ranking in terms of how necessarily strong are the builds. I think it's how easy is it to take advantage of Solgard. I think it's much easier to take advantage of Coldchannel and Direchannel. But that's how I would set it up. All right, next up is Primordium, the Umbra Exile champion. Primordium has the following lore. I can feel the end of my days loom near as these frequent visions become more frequent and more confusing. It seems even the Umbra Shroud has origins beyond my prior knowledge. This primordial shadow rumbles with the weight of the entire shroud under its cloak. But what happened to this ancient creature? So from a design perspective, we have this kind of like ancient shrouded, it looks like it has a kind of mask. And all of the Primordium have the same design, that they are shrouds that are gorged by other Umbra units, or I mean any units, but really about the Umbra. So how does that translate into gameplay? We have 3 different upgrade paths. You have Superfood, which is the status effect oriented gorge effect. You have Stalwart Snack, which is about having more and more buffet stacks, meaning you can eat more and more before Primordium is finally all the way gorged. And Aggressive Edible, which has much higher damage numbers, and then the idea is you can scale up a unit very quickly. But all 3 kind of fit the same theme. It's that this ancient shroud being that feeds the rest of the Umbra. Kind of interesting. This I don't know. I don't know how they eat it from like the picture perspective, like from the design perspective, but at least from the gameplay and the lore, it's kind of interesting. Well, let's jump into the first upgrade path, Superfood. So Superfood at rank 1 increases the health by 7 and adds the effect, add this unit's damage, health, and then status effects to the Eater. At rank 2, everything else is the same, but it adds to damage shield, and those damage shield are status effects, so they can be added to the Eater as well. And then finally, it increases from damage shield 2 to damage shield 4. So no additional stat bonuses, no additional buffets, but you do get extra damage shield as a kind of sustain on the unit that's eating Primordium. So in terms of strengths, moderate health scaling, it's the highest of the different Primordium builds in terms of base health. And you get all of the buffs transfer. So there's a lot of buffs that can transfer. You can transfer Rage, Spikes, Regen, Multi-Strike, Trample, Quick, Damage Shield, Stealth, Armor, and Burnout. Burnout I put in asterisks because sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's good, but we'll call it a buff for now. In addition, it starts with Damage Shield at rank 2 and 3. That helps it to be a little bit more protected. And as well, it gives those bonuses to the Eater or the Gorger as long as that damage shield gets maintained. Weaknesses: very low damage scaling on the Gorger. There's no innate backline access. There's no innate sustain. And it also passes on debuffs. So Sap, Ember Drain, Daze, Fragile, and Melee Weakness are all given to the Eater if they are on Primordium. And the way that the buffs work is you get the full stacks on top, meaning that if, for example, if you put Multi-Strike onto Superfood, it's going to give Multi-Strike every time it's eaten to the same amount that's on Primordium. Opportunities: very high benefit from all buffs because all those buffs get passed on to the Eater. High benefit from stat enhancements. That's true of all Primordiums because you put stat enhancements onto Primordium and then they get all passed on to the Eater. On Reform, can provide Burnout to Gorger in addition to the increased stats. Can be brought back with Retch. And damage shield plus armor tends to be better than lifesteal, which tends to be better than regen. Mostly because those tend to be better stacked onto the front enemy unit. But also just to protect him as well. And then just the note there again on reform, compared to the other two also get the benefits of the increased stats on reform, but they don't apply the burnout. To reform Primordium, he has to die. Like die, not get eaten, but actually die. But if you can get him to die and then reform him, he will come back with more stats and can be eaten again, at least as long as he's alive with burnout. In terms of threats, very weak to debuffs. All debuffs are really bad on Superfood because then they get applied each time to the front enemy unit, which can mean that you have Super Sap, Super Ember Drain, Super Daze, Super Fragile, and so on. Very weak to spikes, weak to sweep. This is true of all Primordiums because they have such low health. And then, of course, Seraph Temper and Sap is pretty bad. Seraph the Chase's Cleanse effect is also pretty damaging because you half all the buffs you're passing to the front enemy unit, and the front enemy unit has the buffs they've gotten already all halved as well. And Seraph the Patient's melee weakness. If you happen, for some reason, to have Primordium up front and gets melee weakness, then the unit that gorges will also get melee weakness. In terms of tactical tips, Superfood Primordium is a moderate health support unit, which relies on its buffet, in particular its transfer of buffs, to scale a frontline gorger. As it has relatively low health, you should play it on the back line, except possibly in reform burnout decks. So what you can do is, especially with Superfood and also aggressive edible, you can put Primordium in the front on the top floor, and by the time the enemies reach the top, if they don't die before they reach the top, they will kill Primordium, and then you can reform him again and again and again and again. Because the first time he reforms, he'll have 1 burnout, which then he dies right after. You can reform him again. He'll have 2 burnout, then he'll die. Then at the end, he has 3 burnout. Then he could actually be gorged. But you can get a lot more stacks that way. Although with Superfood, you have to be careful because buffs don't carry through reform. At least most buffs don't carry. Stat enhancements do carry, but other buffs don't. So just make sure you're not accidentally killing him when you want to get buffs off of him. Normally, you want to give plenty of time for your gorge unit to scale. So typically playing on the top floor makes the most sense. Just be very careful and be aware that the daze effect will be transferred to the gorger. And Superfood has, I think, the most scaling potential of almost any build in the game. It's the only build where you're going to see stuff like 15, 20 multi-strike consistently. But it can be a detriment because you can also get all those debuffs applied to the gorger. And especially with those Seraph debuffs, just be really cautious that you don't get yourself stuck with like 100 sap or something. I mean, obviously you're not going to get 100 sap, but getting insane amounts of sap can happen very quickly in Seraph Temperament, as well as in, melee weakness and other problems. So just be careful about it. In terms of building around Superfood, highly recommend getting just the standard best gorgers. So Overgorger, Crucible Warden, Crucible Collector, Shadow Eater, Alloyed Construct. All of them are really good. You don't need a Morsel Maker, Morsel Master as desperately when you have Primordium builds, but they're still quite good. And if you have a Shadow Siege is always good, but you just have to be able to play it. If you can play it, then it's great. In terms of spells, it's all the buffs. Furnace Tap, Void Binding, Perils of Production, Umbra Stone, Immortal Trade, and then finally Wretch to bring him back after he's died. But yeah, all of that's going to be fantastic. It's all going to go onto your Eater. They're going to get huge. Especially Furnace Tap, it just gets out of control. If you can get Furnace Tap during the first Gorge, you're guaranteed at least 3 stacks, and if it's double stacked, 6 stacks of multi-strike. That's insane. It's going to make any unit just entirely overpowered. For artifacts, Fossilized Fangs, you're going to be gorging. Might as well get double gorge triggers. Makes sense. Chain of Gems is great because you can start with an extra 2 damage shield, which then gets applied to the front enemy unit. And that will stack as long as the damage shield gets maintained. Refined Void to get lifesteal onto the front. Not enemy unit. The front friendly unit that gorges. And then Forever Flame. I actually like Forever Flame a lot. It works well because oftentimes you have issues when you have high Ember Drain decks getting units out. So then you can have all this Ember Drain, but still be able to play out stuff. And that becomes really valuable. And it's also quite good if you want to get Shadow Siege out. But it's primarily to just get other units out, even when you're fully Ember Drained. For secondary clans, Hellhorned, Deranged Brute tends to be really good because there's a lot of rage you can buff. And then if Deranged Brute gets all that rage is going to do way more damage. Branded Warrior similarly. The nice thing about Branded Warrior is if you happen to get kills on the same floor where Primordium is, then Primordium benefits from the rage buff, which then gets applied to the Gorger again. Fledgling Imp applies it to both the Gorger and to Primordium. You just got to make sure that he dies, because you really don't want Fledgling Imp to be your Gorge unit. But as long as Fledgling Imp is able to die, then it can be a really good way to stack lots of rage really fast. For spells, it's all about rage. Dark Deal, Ritual of Battle are your two main enablers of rage. I mean, there are other ones as well, but these are the two main ones, especially early on. They're a quick burst. You don't want a little bit of rage, because a little bit of rage can go away rather quickly, but getting something like a Ritual of Battle, that's going to be something like 17 rage, no, more than that, 27 rage if you get all three Gorges with Ritual of Battle. And then Branding Right. Branding Right is good for your front enemy unit, or for your front Gorge unit. It's also good on Primordium, because that armor will then get carried over each time. And even though you took damage, you still get the full effect, the full 10 HP added, even if Primordium is damaged. Artifacts, if you're taking any demons at all, Gurg's Goad's going to be fantastic. Resonant Shard to get more value out of your rage. Collection of Tails to make your rage last longer. For Awoken, Animus of Will is going to be your preferred, basically on all Primordium decks, because you get so much value out of the extra damage and health with Animus of Will. After that, I'd take Shattered Shell and Husk Hermit. Sweep also uses the damage buffs, are quite good, but Animus of Will is just going to be your best one in almost every case. For spells, it's all about stacking stuff onto Primordium. So Razor Sharp Edge, Steel Enhancer, Cycle of Life, and Sharpen. The nice thing about Superfood with Sharpen and Cycle of Life is that you get both benefits, right? You get the spikes and you get the buff, and both of them are going to get applied to your front unit, which is really, really strong. What you could put right after this as a fifth is either Regen, which stacks okay. It's not great, but it can stack okay. And then the other would be Wildwood Tome, which would give quick to both Primordium and the front enemy unit. Or front friendly. I keep saying front enemy unit because of Stygian Guard. It's front friendly unit. And then in terms of artifacts, Emblem of Exiles is amazing. And if you get Emblem of Exiles, put Primordium up front so that Primordium can get the extra health, which then gets applied to the Gorger. And then Gnarled Root becomes really good, because Gnarled Root also takes those spikes that you're getting from Cycle of Life and Sharpen, and then will apply it as damage also to the unit that gorges. For Stygian Guard, it's, for me, priority on sweep units and really kind of AoE in general. So Cold Celia, Icy Silophyte, and then Titan Sentry. You can do an incant build, but I find the incanters are not really necessary, and the sweep effect, getting huge damage numbers on the sweep units, tends to be really, really strong. For spells, anything that's going to protect your Primordium and your top floor, or your Primordium and your Gorger, is going to be the best for you. So Frenzied Swarm, Siren Song, Spike of the Stygian for targeted damage, Ice and Pyre for big burst. All that's going to be really good. There's not really any buff spells you can play with Stygian Guard, so it's all about just protection in that case. For priority artifacts, I think Titan's Claws is really good with the Ember Drain package cards. So if you get Double Stack and Permafrost onto Frenzied or Furnace Tap, then it will be free after the first turn it shows up. And you usually don't want to play Furnace Tap right away anyway. So having it hold over is quite good. And then a bunch of your other Stygian spells also do really well with Titan's Claws. You can get even a double stacked Void Binding, get Permafrost on it, and then you don't have to worry about it costing after you've been Ember Drained. And then Totem Fragment to discard and then get some Ember back is another way you can generate some Ember after you've been fully Ember Drained. Looking at Melting Remnant, Legion of Wax, if you can fit them, it's bonkers, because Legion of Wax, all of those buffs, not the not the buffs, but the pure stat buffs get added onto all of the individual pieces of Legion of Wax once he breaks apart after he dies. So you can get a huge Legion of Wax and then break it apart into a whole bunch of huge, smaller Legions of Wax, which can be very, very strong. I also really like Lady of the Reformed. The main reason I like Lady of the Reformed is it allows you to put burnout enhancements onto your Primordium without worrying about whether the unit up front can survive long enough. Lady of the Reformed will stack her own burnout. She also has a lot of health, so she'll take a lot of advantage out of all of the buffs you're putting on there. One of my first major successful Covenant 25 runs was a multi-striking Lady of the Reformed with Primordium, and it was fantastic. Big Sludge is also really good because not only do you get the benefit of all of the gorges, you also then are killing things with Big Sludge, which gives you a lot of harvest triggers as well. For spells, Remnant Pact with any of the Primordiums is amazing because it's the only the only way that you can get back Primordium after Primordium gorges all the way out or loses all of its buffet stacks is with Wretch or with Endless. And the only ways to apply Endless are Remnant Pact and Votive Key. So they're a priority in any one of the Primordium builds. Remnant Pact and Votive Key are amazing because they allow you to let your Primordium die and then come back. The other benefit, specifically with Superfood, is that Endless would then get applied to the front enemy unit because it's a buff. So you can also make your Gorger Endless by putting Endless onto Primordium. So really cool. Resin removal, because if you don't want to pass on any of those negative debuffs, resin removal allows you to remove them before they get gorged by your Gorge unit. Similar with Wickless Recruitment, you can also remove burnout that way. So if you're worried about applying burnout to a front enemy unit or front friendly unit, I keep saying enemy unit, front friendly unit, Wickless Recruitment will remove the burnout so you don't have to worry about that. And then Wicklash is also really, really good because you get that stat buff. And if you want the burnout, you get the burnout buff as well. And then artifacts, we already talked about Votive Key, and the other one would be Resin Block. If you get Resin Block and Votive Key, or Resin Block and Remnant Pact, your Primordium is going to do so much for you. That's a guaranteed plus 10 every 3 turns. It's going to get huge real fast. So again, with Superfood, it's all about taking advantage of the buffs, and you want to put them on units that can take advantage of it the most. So things like your sweep units, your multi-strikers, your rage buffs, all that kind of stuff you want to take advantage of. Moving into Stalwart Snack. Stalwart Snack is a 3/3 with 5 buffet. At rank 2, it increases to 8 buffet. At rank 3, it increases to 12 buffet. So the stats don't change, but the buffet stacks increase with each rank of Stalwart Snack. So the strengths, it's got really high buffet stacks, especially at rank 2 and 3, which can be very valuable. Weaknesses, it has low damage scaling and low health scaling. There's also no innate backline access. There's also no innate sustain. Opportunities, you can get a huge benefit from stat enhancements, more than the others because you have more gorges. So if you get early stat enhancements onto Primordium, you have a lot of turns of being able to apply those stat buffs. On Reform, doesn't apply burnout, but it does imply stat buffs. It can be brought back with Wretch, and damage, shield, and armor typically are going to be better than lifesteal and regen here to protect you from getting killed. Oh, and I actually missed a note. The other nice thing about Stalwart Snack compared to the others is you can actually use it during Relentless, and it will like if you have a 12, if you Wretch it back and then you have 12 turns of gorging, that's a huge deal for most of your gorge units. So getting that on there becomes really valuable. And finally, threats. It's very weak to spikes. It's only got 3 health, so any spike will kill it immediately. And it's very weak to sweep for the same reason. So you got to be careful about that through your whole run. All right, so looking at tactical tips. So Stalwart Snack Primordium is a low health, low damage support unit which relies on its buffet, in particular its high number of buffet stacks to scale a frontline gorger. So as it has very low health, you want it in the back line, except Icarus, as we talked about with Reform and Burnout decks. And then I would recommend putting it on the top floor so you have plenty of time for your gorge unit to gorge. Typically, Stalwart Snack is best when you have a unit that relies on gorging for its sustain or scaling. So think of things like Overgorger, Alloyed Construct, and then even like the Crucible Ward and Crucible Collector. It's all about getting lots of gorge stacks, even over the stat buffs that you're getting. Looking at deck building, so for me, the priority units are all the ones that are going to use a lot of gorges to good benefit. So Overgorger, Alloyed Construct. Shadow Eater is also pretty good. In fact, the one nice thing about Shadow Eater is because you have so many buffet stacks, you can actually get some value out of Relentless with Shadow Eater, doing extra damage to bosses because of all of the buffet stacks you're able to get. And then, of course, the Crucible Ward and Crucible Collector are going to be good, and then Shadow Siege if you can play it. Looking at priority spells, since you're going to typically have a strong Gorger anyway, getting a Shroud Spike makes a lot of sense. You can already fit, with most of them, you can fit both Primordium and the Gorger, and potentially also at least one other morsel, so then Shroud Spike becomes really, really valuable. Space Prism to give you even more space to put morsels. Feast. So Feast is good because it allows you to get an early stack. Since you have so many stacks of buffet, that you can try to get through those stacks earlier. Wretch is always going to be good to bring it back at the end. And it's really good during Relentless, again, because you have so many stacks there. You can get 7 or 8 gorges during Relentless can be really valuable, especially on something like Overgorger or even like the Collector or Crucible Warden. They're going to continue to get that stack every time throughout the fight, which can be really valuable. Grovel's pretty good. You can put it onto the Primordium in order to protect it and then use the morsels to gorge from. And then Prism Retrieval. So this is interesting. I tried this a couple times. It works pretty well. What you do is you have to have maximum 2 priority units, or maybe even you could have more, but basically you need to have only a handful of units in your deck, and you don't play Primordium the first turn. You play your Gorge unit, and then you wait till you get Prism Retrieval. You play Prism Retrieval, and you draw back the Stalwart Snack with the massive buff. And then that gets applied for all of the stacks. So even if you play it for 2 Ember, that's plus 10 damage onto Stalwart Snack, which then goes onto your Gorger through all of the buffet stacks. Really, really powerful. So one of the only times where Prism Retrieval is actually quite good. But if you try to do it like that, it actually works pretty well. You just have to avoid having lots of units. If you have lots of units, it doesn't work. But if you only have like 1 or 2 units, you can get this to work pretty guaranteed. It does mean that you're slightly delayed in getting your Primordium out, but then your Primordium's like insanely strong. Artifacts, Fossilized Fangs. Of course, for any Gorge build, you want Fossilized Fangs. Light's Gift to prevent damage on the top floor where you're gorging. Abandoned Umbra to get even more morsels to gorge with. And then Hammered Chestplates is actually pretty good. It doubles the health on doubles the health on Primordium, which then gets applied for each one of the stacks. That ends up being an extra 36 health at rank 3 that you're adding onto the friendly unit. Secondary clan, starting with Hellhorned. All about those demons. They gorge pretty good. That's all you can say about them. And then protecting your front line. I mean, probably what you'll end up doing is a 2-floor setup. You have a demon floor, and then you have a gorge floor. I don't think it's really very good normally to use Stalwart Snack at rank 3 on anything but a gorge unit. But if you need to, you can put it on a multi-striker to try to get some benefit. Like if you have a Gurg's Goad, you can do it. But then it's basically just like strong demons plus sustain is going to do it for you. For Awoken, it's just some of your best standard priority units: Animus of Will, Shattered Shell, Sweep. Any type of sweep is going to be really good. And then Razor Sharp Edge, Steel Enhancer, and Cycle of Life, because Primordium gets real thick, gets real strong with all those buffs. With Emblem of Exiles, if you happen to get it, same thing as before. You put it in the front. It gets all of the health stacks. Those get applied to the other units. And then Thorn Fruit just for the draw. But really it's all about, with Awoken, getting all the stat buffs onto Primordium, because they are really, really good to stack onto your Gorge unit. Stygian Guard. Again, sweep units and tank units tend to be the best ones, but I would again do a 2-floor setup. And if you do a 2-floor setup, you know, maybe I should even change this. If you do a 2-floor setup, you'd want incanters, but you can gorge with these units and it's okay. They take advantage of the stats pretty well. And then in terms of spells, again, it's just protecting that top floor. So Frenzied Swarm, Siren Song, Spike of the Stygian, Ice and Pyre for burst. And then the same priority artifacts are Titan's Claws and Totem Fragment. So again, you can do a 2-floor setup where you have Primordium on 1 floor with a Gorger and then an incant floor, and then you need to build completely differently. But if you are going to use Primordium with a unit, these are the units that I would pick. For Melting Remnants, same story as before. Only main difference here is you can do a kind of Subsuming Blade reform. That can be pretty good. But Remnant Pact, again, really, really good. What's also nice about this is Remnant Pact allows you to basically guarantee that your Primordium will be available for almost every Relentless floor, because you can have it get eaten all the way and then put it on the bottom floor, have it go through Relentless, put it on the middle floor, have it go through Relentless, put it on the top floor, have it go through Relentless. You can get a lot of value out of Endless. But then in terms of units, you just want units that can take advantage of all the stats, which is Legion of Wax, Lady of the Reformed, Big Sludge, maybe a Wickless Baron. And then in terms of like Molded and Subsuming Blade, you can do that to try to get extra stats onto Primordium. And then for artifacts, you have Votive Key for the Endless, and then Resin Block to get even better stats on when it comes back, either from being molded or from Endless. In general, it's basically the secondary clan isn't so important with Stalwart Snack. You really just want a really strong Gorge unit, and then you need to fill out what do you need from there. Do you need AoE? Do you need Burst? Do you need Sustain? And build out accordingly. And finally, Aggressive Edible. Aggressive Edible is a 10-3 unit with 3 buffet. At rank 2, the damage doubles to 20 damage, and at rank 3, it doubles again to 40 damage. So in terms of the SWAT, starting with strengths, it's the highest damage scaling out of the Gorgers. Weaknesses, it has very low health like the others as well. Has no innate backline access, has no innate sustain. And it's got really high benefits from stat enhancements like all the Primordiums do. And on reform, again, does not provide burnout, but gets additional stats. Can be brought back with Retch. And again, damage, shield, and armor is going to be better than lifesteal, better than regen. But none of that's really so important. In terms of threats, it's very weak to spikes, it's very weak to sweep. It's not really weak to anything else, though. So, yeah, I mean, SWAT's kind of whatever. Let's talk about the way to play it. So, with Aggressive Edible, it's really relying on its high base damage to scale a frontline Gorger very quickly. As it has very low health, you put it in the back, except for the reform. And this is one of the best ones to reform, in my opinion, because that you don't really want to... You don't use it for like all the, many gorges. You use it for big gorges as many times as you can. And reform just makes it even better. Again, recommend playing on the top floor. And if you have the reform, you play it in the front on the top floor so that it dies and then can be reformed. Otherwise, you play it in the back on the top floor. And what's different about this one compared to all the others is this is I think the best Gorger, the best Primordium for non-Gorge units. And especially things like Quick, Sweep, Trample, Multi-Strike, all of them make much better use than your kind of standard Gorgers normally would. I mean, it's good with a Gorger. It's not bad with a Gorger. Primordium's always going to be good in those cases. But this is a particularly good path for a higher variety of units. Multi-Strikers, Sweeps, and Trample units. With that, Alwood Construct is insane with Aggressive Edible because it already has native it has native multi-strike. So you're already taking advantage of the increased attack over, more than normal. And then you just need to make sure you have enough morsels to support the rest of the alloyed construct with fuel. And then all the rest are also going to benefit. Crucible Collector, Crucible Warden, they're going to get pretty high damage. Even Shadow Eater is pretty good with it, because Shadow Eater normally doesn't really do a lot of damage. But with Aggressive Edible, it can do a lot of damage. I mean, it's basically, at rank 3, it's 120 damage you're adding to a front unit without any other enhancements. And then, of course, finally, Overgorge or Shadow Siege are both going to be good. Shadow Siege, if you can play it. In terms of spells, I mean, Wretch. You really, really, really want Wretch with this build. It's so good. It's 120 every time you can bring it back. It's an extra 120 damage. Or even, 30 damage at rank 1. It's so good. Furnace Tap. You don't use Furnace Tap, obviously, for Primordium, but Furnace Tap on the unit that's going to Gorge Primordium is fantastic. Umbra Stone for the same reason. You can do Grovel to protect Primordium or protect the frontliner and then create 2 morsels. Space Prism for more space, and Feast to get through the stacks faster. Artifacts, obviously Fossilized Fangs, still going to be the best. Mind Jacks for extra capacity. Light's Gift to protect the top floor. And then Advanced Prototype. Yeah, Advanced Prototype. So with Aggressive Edible and Advanced Prototype, you can have some sick stewards. You can actually not have to get any other units. I've done it before. This is one of the best builds for a full steward build, is Advanced Prototype with Aggressive Edible Primordium. It's fantastic. You already get 2 damage shield. If you get Quick as well as a basic enhancement, this thing is going to just wreck everybody. Moving on to other clans. Hellhorned, any demon. You're going to love it on any demon. Can even make some other units a little bit better. Things like Steelworker, or even the... I'm trying to think what it's called. The unit that has the knockback effect is also really good with extra damage. But I still think you go for your standard ones, your Demon Fiend, your Alpha Fiend, your Consumer of Crowns if you have Imps. In terms of spells, again, it's all about sustain. You're going to have plenty of damage. You just need the sustain. So Branding Right, Alloy of Ancients, March of Shields are going to be great. Gurg's Goad to get multi-strike. That's the big thing. If you can get multi-strike on an Aggressive Edible Eater, it's always going to be a good time. And then Relhammer to increase the sustain. For Awoken, still, it's all about stat increases. Animus of Will is absolute bonkers with Aggressive Edible. Shattered Shell's also very good because of the sweep, similar with Husk Hermit. And then you just want all those stat buffs. Razor Sharp Edge, Steel Enhancer, Cycle of Life. And then Artifacts the same. Emblem of Exiles to get that stacking health. And then Thorn Fruit for the draw and free damage. Looking at Stygian Guard, again, it's your sweep units and your tank. Cold Celia, Ice Telephite, Titan Sentry, they're all going to be really good. And you might ask, I've seen Titan Sentry 3 times here, why? It's because having Titan Sentry with a lot of damage means that he can act both as a tank, as a backline sweep, and as frontline damage, which normally you don't get all in one unit. So that makes him really powerful. Same with the sweep units, Cold Celia and Ice Telephite, and then with with Awoken, Shattered Shell, and Husk Hermit. For spells, it's all about protection again. Frenzied Swarm, Siren Song, Spike of the Stygian, and then for Big Burst, Ice and Pyre. Artifacts, the same setup. You want things that can get held over and become free, and Totem Fragment to get extra Ember on your discards. Finishing it off, Melting Remnant. Man, if you thought Remnant Pact and Votive Key was good before, you're in for a nice surprise with Aggressive Edible. So anything you can do to bring back Aggressive Edible is fantastic. If you play Melting Remnant, you should find a way to make sure that if you don't have Remnant Pact, you don't have Votive Key, find a way to make sure that Primordium dies and can get reformed. Because on reform, it gets even more insane. I really, really like Subsuming Blade molded builds with Primordium. I find it to be very, very strong. And then you just want your big Gorge, your big units that are going to take advantage of that. So Legion of Wax, Lady of the Reformed, Big Sludge. Yeah, all that's going to be really good. So in summary, with aggressive edible, you just want units that can take advantage of the high damage, and you want to find ways to get aggressive edible back into your hand and stacking even higher. And then everything you can do to get more multi-strike, to get more stats, to get more buffs onto your Primordium is going to help as well. Then, looking at Primordium as a whole, Primordium is actually one of the units that is better flexed than not. The main reason why is that none of the third upgrade paths, with the exception of aggressive edible, none of them are stellar rank 3 upgrades. So, for example, Stalwart Snack at rank 3 is like meh. Because you already are going to have 5 or 8 stacks of buffet, and those extra 4 stacks honestly don't provide as much value as either superfood or aggressive edible would with the same set of buffs. So think about that. With aggressive edible, 1 rank of that adds 7. So you would have plus, let's say, plus 12 damage, 3 times the 4 extra buffet stacks, or 5, so 3 times, no, that's right, 3 times 4, 12, or 7 times 8, 56 extra damage. So just 1 aggressive edible is better than going to rank 3 of Stalwart Snack. And Stalwart Snack is amazing for both superfood and aggressive edible because it gives them 5 stacks instead of 3. So for superfood, that means more stacks of all your buffs, and for aggressive edible, that means more stacks of your 20 damage. So I just think it's almost always better to mix it up here. Superfood should be mixed in anytime you have significant buffs available. Stalwart Snack should almost always be mixed in at least as a one-off. And aggressive edible is probably the only exception where rank 3 is actually valuable because you double that damage amount. But apart from that, I mean, especially like rank 3 superfood, you get more damage shield. Like, who cares? It's really about getting either more damage or more stacks out of superfood. So that's my recommendation, is to try to get a good mix of Stalwart Snack and others. And then in the rare case you take superfood and aggressive edible, I don't know, you do you, but I would normally do Stalwart Snack as a flex in those cases. Personal ranking, I think they're all equally viable. It really depends on your support cards. If you have high buffs, take superfood, especially if you don't have a really scary Seraph. If you have the chance to get really good multi-strikers or sweep units, take aggressive edible. If you get, starting with advanced prototype, that's what it's called. If you get advanced prototype, absolutely take aggressive edible. If you have an early, well, I guess you can't really decide, but I mean, Stalwart Snack's always a safe bet, and then you just prioritize getting a really strong Gorger. So, I think all of them can work. And it's more about what best fits the cards that you have. The playstyle is more or less the same with all of them. But Primordium is pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty good. Nothing really much more to say about it. And now we're on the final champion, Little Fade, the Exile Melting Remnant champion. Little Fade's lore is, for all that I've learned of these exiles, it should be no surprise to me that the exile of the Melting Remnant is a thieving child. My visions of her have been brief, but she looks to be free of the wax for which her ring is known. Perhaps her sacrifice and the sacrifice of each exile granted immortality to the clans. From her design, she's like a little orphan child, wax child with candle ears coming out of her hat that are on fire. So you get this idea that she's very weak and small and nimble, but maybe very clever. And so how does that work out into gameplay? So she has 3 different setups here. Firelight, which is on Extinguish, she makes the units on the same floor as her, the friendly units, much stronger with damage and health buffs as well as burnout. So it's like she ignites them when she dies, making them stronger. Then you have Eternal Flame, which is that every time you kill her, she comes back stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, but also costs more Ember. And then you have Little Icarus, which is that every time she kills something, she gets more and more powerful to the point where, and it's permanent. It's across the entire run. She's getting more and more powerful. So very interesting. All three have death and coming back over and over again as part of their theme in different ways, and they end up playing quite a bit different. Probably one of the most varied setups across them, although two of them are kind of carry oriented and one of them is more of a support. Very, very solid design. But enough about design. Let's jump into gameplay, starting with Firelight. So Firelight at rank 1, she is a 5 damage, 1 health unit that has Extinguish, apply plus 5 damage, plus 5 health, and Burnout 2 to friendly units. At rank 2, the damage triples to plus 15 damage, and at rank 3, it doubles to plus 30 damage. So what does that mean in terms of her strengths? Very high scaling damage on units, moderate health scaling on units, burnout scaling on units, and she has a very low capacity requirement. She only takes up 1 space. In terms of weaknesses, she's entirely reliant on reform. Burnout can accidentally kill friendly units if you don't get enough burnout scaling. There's no innate backline access. There's no innate sustain. In terms of opportunities, extreme benefit from extinguish buffs like Intent on Death and Waxer Snuffer. Very high benefit from reform, of course, especially targeted reform. Very little benefit from buffs. None of the buffs are that great on her because she's dying so often that they don't last. The benefit grows with the number of units. So the more units you can fit on the floor with her, the better. Minor benefit from stat enhancements. I mean, if you want to try to buff her up, you can. But the point is for her to die a lot, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. And then avoid any kind of sustain. You don't want her staying alive. You want her to die. And the more she dies, the better. For threats, threats in general. Number 1 is just lack of targeted reform and having lots of dead units in the consume pool. So if you end up playing a lot of units that die, or I guess you wouldn't play dregs, but if you play drafts, if you play tomb units, if you play other units that are dying, imps, things like that, it can make it really difficult to get her back when you need her, and it's very vital that you reform her over and over again. Accidental survival. So you can accidentally keep her alive when you need her to die because her health gets too high, or you accidentally buff her, or you accidentally have a buff relic, something like Chain of Gems, which gives her damage shield, and that can lead to units behind her dying to burnout. And then Seraph the Diligence Consume can be a problem because if you lose all of your reform triggers, then you can't bring her back, and then you can't take benefit from her Extinguish triggers. So how does Firelight play? Firelight Little Fade is a low health, low damage support unit who is used to scale units, sharing her floor using her Extinguish trigger. So as her trigger is the main method of how she's supporting, you always want her in the front. She absorbs 1 hit or multiple hits and then dies, triggering the damage, health, and burnout on friendly units. The only exception to this is when you have Intent on Death, and then you can play her wherever because you can just apply the trigger without her dying. Be very cautious, again, of how many units you put in the reform pool if you don't have any targeted reform. Reforming Little Fade is the critical part of why this build can work. In terms of building, priority units, I love Paraffin Enforcer in this build. He scales himself because he gets burnout from Little Fade dying. He scales any other units you have on the floor, giving him multi-strike, and it can really get to high rage numbers very quickly. Draft is amazing. This is where Draft really shines. Multi-strikers in general love Firelight builds. Legion of Wax is really good because all of the buffs that you apply, except for the burnout, get applied to all of the mini legions as well. So you can get Legion of Wax to have a ton of damage, a ton of health, and then when he breaks apart, all of those little minis also get all of those stat buffs. Wickless Baron's quite good because he doubles. Wickless Baron and BX Sludge for the same reason. They double up on the Harvest when Little Fade dies and the Extinguish trigger. And then Paraffin Thug's also quite good. You can get some pretty reliable kills with Paraffin Thug with multi-strike behind Firelight Little Fade. For spells, Intent on Death. Get it and profit. Intent on Death just pushes this build way over the top because you're typically not going to keep Firelight Little Fade alive with Intent on Death, so she'll actually get 2 Extinguish triggers per turn, and she'll get out of control. Molded Wicked Blaze, you need to get her back. Remnant Pact is another way to get her back, and what I would recommend is reform her once and then put Remnant Pact so that she's always coming back endless with 1 burnout. That's what you want. You want 1 burnout on her. You don't want more burnout. You don't want no burnout. 1 burnout guarantees she dies no matter where you put her and no matter whether she gets attacked. Subsuming Blade allows you to play her multiple times in the same turn. So you play her, Subsuming Blade her to die, mold, bring her back, and on and on and on and on. You can get multiple triggers off of that as well. And then Wicklash, honestly, just to keep your backliners alive. They don't accidentally burn out. Looking at priority artifacts, number 1 is Wax or Snuffer. It doubles her Extinguish trigger, just pushes her way over the top. Fade's First Blade is really good. It increases the rage on all of the units behind her because of the burnout. Votive Key, as a way to keep her always coming back without having to reform her, and also making sure her health doesn't get too large that you can't kill her off. And Advanced Prototype. This is another amazing Advanced Prototype build because then your Trained Stewards take advantage of the health and the extra damage, and they have, by default, Multi-Strike. Really, really strong. Really, really strong. In fact, any of the Steward-related challenges, take Little Fade, Firelight, and they're very, very easy. Pro tip. All right, moving into secondary clans. Again, here you just want anything that can multi-strike, take advantage of the high damage. Deranged Brute tends to work really well because there's a lot of rage to be had in Firelight builds. Branded Warrior is also good because it can grant rage to the other units. Horned Warrior is also decent. Basically what you don't want is a 3 capacity unit because you want to fit as many units as possible. In terms of spells, getting multi-strike is the priority, so One Horn's Tome is really good. And normally your very, very backline unit isn't going to take damage unless there's like sweep or spikes. Excluding those 2 cases, normally your backliner is able to be protected by all of the health getting put on by Little Fade, as well as the unit behind Little Fade. March of Shields is really good. In fact, March of Shields plus Hidden Passage is a kind of unique way to play this, where you can overstack the floor, but still get Little Fade into the front. You reform her, Hidden Passage her, March of Shields her. She'll die to burnout, and then you can have multiple, like 5 or 6 units on that floor if you're insane, or even just like 2 or 3 overstacked, and then keep playing Little Fade on the same floor. It's kind of difficult to manage, but it can work. But in general, March of Shields as a way to stack armor on your other unit behind Little Fade. And then Hidden Passage as a way to try to overstack if possible. Priority artifacts are Gurg's Goad to get multi-strike on your demons, and then Consumed Crown. Very likely your demons are getting a lot of kills, and getting that permanent buff is going to help out as well. You could also take any rage artifact, would be good too. For Awoken, Animus of Will. Yeah, Animus of Will is amazing in these builds. It's going to have a lot of damage, a lot of health. Shattered Shell, Husk Hermit, Sweep units, anything that can take advantage of that extra damage they're getting is going to benefit. And then priority spells, it's just honestly just make your units stronger. Razor Sharp Edge, Steel Enhancer, Root Seeds. You could also go regen if you want, but I find it's not really necessary. You typically have enough damage that you don't get hit a lot before you just kill enemy units and bosses. For our artifacts, I actually really like Root Split Mask. The main reason why is one of the problems with Firelight is the early ramp-up time. And with Root Split Mask, you don't really have to worry about that as much because you get 2 turns of the first set of units. So that should give you enough time to get enough damage off of Little Fade that then you're starting to kill the units on the floor. It also protects against like the units get healed to full if they move up a floor. Trial. And then Thorn Fruit for yeah, for getting stings. I would not necessarily get Emblem of Exiles because there's the chance that you accidentally get too much health on Little Fade and then she doesn't die. And it's very important that she dies. The exception would be if you get Intent on Death, then of course Emblem of Exiles is great because you just get a really, really thick Firelight Little Fade. For Stygian Guard, sweep units are going to be the main name of the game here. Apart from the sweep units, there's a couple interesting interactions. One is Glacial Seal. Glacial Seal, I did a build once off stream that was kind of hilarious. You get Glacial Seal, you copy it a whole bunch, and then you put Little Fade in front. Because Glacial Seal only takes up 1 capacity, you can end up getting like 4 Glacial Seals, and then all the spells you play just like completely wreak havoc on the units and get like insane amounts of frostbite on them. And then on top of that, all the Glacial Seals get all of the buffs from Little Fade when she dies, and you end up with this like insane floor of Glacial Seals with crazy damage, crazy health, and it's just stacking insane amounts of frostbite. You really have to get, if you do that build, you really have to get Forever Flame so that you can play the Glacial Seals for free. But it was hilarious. It was one of my most hilarious runs, and I was kind of sad I didn't get recorded or on stream. But I'll showcase that sometime because it's a really funny build. And then Offering Monument. Offering Monument has a very specific interaction, which is that if you get Intent on Death and you get Offering Monument, and you have a very small hand or several Intent on Deaths, you can actually go infinite. Because every time you use Intent on Death on Little Fade, Offering Monument gets health from Little Fade and then draws, and you can keep doing that forever. It's another one of those infinite combos that can work pretty well. It only requires 2 pieces. It requires an Intent on Death, and it requires Offering Monument. And then you can basically do it as long as you trim your deck down to really low. And you can get like insane damage numbers on Offering Monument, obviously. If it's infinite, you can end up with something like, I don't know, at rank 3, thousands of damage on Offering Monument. For other spells, Offering Tokens, really good just to get those incants rolling. If you have incants, also to just kind of get through your deck. Ancient Synergy is really good for burst because again that can be a problem that you just don't have enough damage by the time the first units are reaching your floor with Firelight Little Fade. Preserve can be really good as a way to typically I use it as a way to like preserve something like Spike of the Stygian or Ancient Synergy for exactly when I need them. You can also use it to preserve Reform, so Moldeds or even primitive molds to make sure that you have a Reform when you need it. So there's a lot of good uses of Preserve in these kind of decks because one of the things is just making sure that you can constantly get Little Fade back, and Preserve helps to make sure you can. And Spike of the Stygian just to stack Sap and Frostbite onto the boss during Relentless. Artifacts. Founding Seal can be pretty good if you have any of the incanters like Glacial Seal or Sign of the Sea. And by the way, any of the incanters are also really good. I only didn't put them there because I prioritized the sweep effect. But if you don't have sweep effect, it's also fine. And then Kinstone Totem to get Ember anytime you discard something. And for Umbra, for me, it's actually, I also did another build like this, which is also kind of funny, which is just a Morsel Master build. The nice thing about Morsel Master is it has pretty good stats for a 1 capacity unit. So you can actually fit a lot of them in a floor. And then on the turns when you don't have a Little Fade, you can just play any Morsel and it gets copied like 2 or 3 times as a chump blocker or as a Gorger. So that kind of works pretty well. Outside of that, Shadow Eater is really good. Crucible War and Crucible Collector are also pretty good. Honestly, it doesn't really matter. Any unit that doesn't take up too much space is going to be really good. With Shadow Eater, I should mention this. With Shadow Eater, I don't typically put Firelight and Shadow Eater on the same floor. I typically put Shadow Eater above the Firelight floor as a cleanup. So you can also do it like that. You can put Shadow Eater above as cleanup and then have your Firelight floor below. Spells, Space Prism and Crucible Extension. The more units you can fit on that floor, the happier you will be. Get as many units as you can stuffed behind Little Fade, and hoo boy, do those numbers add up real quick. Furnace Tap for your backliners and Umbra Stone for your backliners. Once they get high enough damage, Multi-Strike and Trample become really, really powerful. For artifacts, Mind Jacks, get that extra capacity on that middle floor and profit. Chain of Gems, don't put it on Little Fade. Put it on other units, but it can be really good to protect your back units. Although now I'm thinking about it, don't take Chain of Gems. I changed my mind. Just take Mind Jacks. Honestly, none of the other ones are really that important. Chain of Gems is actually bad. I don't know why I put it here. I put it here because I was thinking of the priority unit that's not Little Fade, but the problem is on Reform, it gets up a Little Fade. I guess you could say Little Fade might die to Burnout, but yeah, don't take Chain of Gems. Take something different instead. So ignore that. Take Mind Jacks, ignore Chain of Gems. Whole idea is get units on floor, put Little Fade in front, and profit. Spoiler, not a spoiler. I said I wasn't going to rank builds. I will rank this build. Firelight is the best champion in the game. Firelight Little Fade is the best upgrade path on any champion in this game. It is so brain dead to play this build and win. It is ridiculous. I think I even saw somebody on Reddit got like 100 wins, or now maybe that's excessive. Maybe it was like 30 wins, but just an insane amount of wins with Firelight. It's so good. Yeah, it really needs, honestly, it needs to be toned down. It's too good. It is so consistent. It is so easy to make this build work. That it needs to be. This is my call to the devs. This is the only champion path that is too strong out of all of them. Maybe Primordium, but this is like just insane. Okay, enough about that. Moving on. Eternal Flame. Eternal Flame is a 5 damage, 1 health Little Fade. They're all 5 damage, 1 health. Kind of. But with Extinguish Trigger, plus 25 damage, plus 5 health, and plus 1 Ember cost, and it's endless. At rank 2, the Extinguish Trigger increases to plus 70 damage, and at rank 3, it increases to plus 140 damage. Yeah, so you get extreme damage scaling on Extinguish. If you think that with rank 3, if you die twice, that's 280 damage onto Little Fade, which is actually kind of nuts. You get minor health scaling, but it's like whatever, man. You get pseudo sustain because you have endless, which can be relevant sometimes. And then, of course, you get the low capacity requirement. In terms of weaknesses, the mana cost scaling can become problematic. It has very low base health, has very low base damage, and has no innate backline damage. Opportunities, high benefit for multi-strike and trample and quick, but only after you've died the last time you want to die. If you do it before, you lose those buffs when you die and come back. And extreme benefit from Intent on Death. Yeah, you can get some insane damage numbers with Intent on Death and Waxer Snuffer. Waxer Snuffer is the other one that also heavily benefits. With Waxer Snuffer, you got to be a little bit careful because you don't want to get to a point where you can't play Little Fade. But what's nice is that you can, if you are doing a 2 death Little Fade, which is normally what I do, I usually do 2 deaths with Eternal Flame, you can get that in 1 death. In terms of sustain, damage shield is going to be better than armor because of the low health total. Or damage shield and armor are going to be better than regen and lifesteal because of the low health total is what I'm trying to say. Threats. Weak to spikes, weak to sweep. Dies very quickly, can become too expensive to play. This is a very big problem, and you have to die several times to get value. And this is another problem. It's slow. To get this Little Fade to start doing something usually takes 2 or 3 deaths, and that means you're not doing something else. Let's get into the tactics because I think this is important to note. It's a glass cannon damage carry that relies on extinguish triggers to scale before acting as a primary damage dealer to frontline bosses and units. In order to scale, Little Fade has to use her trigger several times, either by dying or triggering with Intent on Death. Given this requirement, frontline and early to absorb damage, and then trigger her extinguish trigger, switching back to the backline after 2 or 3 triggers. And I would only do 2 or 3 triggers for lots of reasons. So you might be tempted, hey, I can just get extra Ember, and then I can play her more times. But there's another thing to consider, which is that every time you're playing Little Fade, you're not playing something else. And every time Little Fade dies, you didn't draw a card because of the Endless. So you need to be very, very careful. There's a trap here to think that having her come back multiple times is the way to play. It really isn't. I after doing this a whole bunch of times and trying to make, massive, high Ember Little Fades work, I always come back to basically 2 or 3 triggers. Even normally 2. 2 triggers is almost enough for every run. The loss of tempo of playing her instead of other cards, it starts to get really heavy after 2 or 3 times. So I would just highly recommend try to play around and think ahead. I'm going to let Little Fade die 2 times, maybe 3 times, and then I'm going to start doing my other stuff, because you can't overlook how much tempo you lose every time you don't draw a card and every time you don't play something else. Looking at deck building then, priority units, Wickless Baron, you want to get, typically it works really well with Harvest, because you're, first it's dying, so then you get the Harvest trigger off of Little Fade dying, and then those, especially Wickless Baron, gets pretty tanky after a lot of units have died, so then you can switch and put Little Fade in the back, and get a lot of kills with Little Fade, because Little Fade will have a lot of damage by then, and then Wickless Baron will get pretty tanky from it. Big Sludge also works. Legion of Wax is quite good as well as a tank. You just want then, after that, you want big bodies. Molten Encasement can also be pretty good, or Entombed Explosion. But really it's about, I typically like Endless Little Fade or Eternal Flame Little Fade as part of a Harvest build. So then you get all the main Harvest units, Remnant Host, Entombed Explosion, Molten Encasement. Looking at priority spells, Intent on Death, again, is absolutely nuts in this build. Get it. Just get it and be happy. You don't even have to then let her die. You can just put her in the back, Intent on Death her until she gets insanely strong. Wicklash is really good. The main reason why you use Wicklash is use it early. You don't care if she dies. So what you do, if you know you have Wicklash in your build, you play Little Fade in the back line, you Wicklash her while other units are kind of tanking for her, and then she'll die, come back, and she keeps all of those stat bonuses from the Wicklash. That's why it works. A Fatal Melting is really good. You're going to let her die 2 or 3 times. That usually is enough to get enough damage that Fatal Melting becomes really strong, and it's always really strong in Harvest builds anyway. Engulfed in Smoke is quite good once you've let her die a couple of times. Crushing Demise can be good for cleanup, and Subsuming Blade can also be good in case you're struggling to get her to die. I don't know how often that happens, but it can happen. It has happened a few times to me where you put her in the back line or you put her in the front line and she's just not dying. And then you can Subsuming Blade her to kill her. You can also make it a little bit faster too. You can do something like Subsuming Blade, and then if you have an ability to draw, you can draw her, play her again immediately. That can also work pretty well. Looking at artifacts, Wax or Snuffer, you want to, again, get to the point where she's actually doing something as quickly as you can. Resin Block means that when she comes back, she has more damage. Flicker's Liquor. So Flicker's Liquor is the one exception. If you get Flicker's Liquor, you can play her to like insane levels. The main reason why you want to avoid having her come back a whole bunch of times is because the Ember trade-off, right? So yes, you maybe can afford 4 Ember, but that means you're not playing other cards. With Flicker's Liquor, you get around that because now you can play either other units to make her free, or you can play her and then something else will be free. So it reduces the opportunity cost of playing Little Fade so many times. And then Forever Flame. Forever Flame also lowers the opportunity cost of having to play Little Fade so many times. All right, looking at secondary clans. With Hellhorned, I really like her with Imp builds. Again, I typically do a Harvest-oriented build, so then all of those Imps are really good to get Harvest stacks onto your Harvest units. It's also really good for the end. You can get like Transcend Imp with Welder Helper, so you play a bunch of Welder Helpers, you get Endless on Transcend Imp, and then you can start stacking for a really strong tank in front of Little Fade. And then if you're going to take all of these Imps, Important Work, Imp in a Box, both are quite good. You could even do Impressive is also okay. Vent, because one of the problems with this build is AoE, and this is also why you take a Fatal Melting. But yeah, any AoE is going to be really strong here, so Vent is quite good. And One Horn's Tome. She has low health anyway. you might as well give her multi-strike. I mean, of course, you wait till after she's died a couple times. You put her in the back, give her multi-strike. That huge damage number can get applied twice. In terms of artifacts, Ash to the Fallen is great with any imp build, and then Impsicle to get more imps. It's just how I play it. Maybe there's a better way to set it up, but I really like imp builds with Eternal Flame. For Awoken, you want thick tanks. So Thorned Hollow is quite good. It's also a good AoE. Awoken Hollow is quite good. Wilting Sapwood allows you to kind of get around that opportunity cost, having to play Little Fade so many times because you can get more Ember out of it. And then you want AoE. So Glimmer is quite good. And then regen. You want a lot of regen on your tanks, especially if you get Thorned Hollow or Awoken Hollow. And then finally, yeah, Emblem of Exiles is great. You just have to make sure that Little Fade dies the first couple of times, but then after that, you know, whatever unit you have in front, a Hollow or Wickless Baron or whatever, will take advantage of all of that extra HP. And then the Bloating Fungus. If you have any type of regen, then Bloating Fungus becomes really good. It makes all that regen apply twice rather than once. Or sorry, let me rephrase that. It allows your regen to do +2 health per regen instead of +1. Stygian Guard. Here, again, it's really solid tanks, and I really like Titan Sentry especially because Titan Sentry hits the backline, which is one of the weaknesses. After that, Siren of the Sea is quite good. Guardian Stone's quite good. Guardian Stone in particular ends up being really strong in these builds because you let Little Fade die a couple times, and then you put it behind the Guardian Stone, and you can stack some defense also onto Little Fade, as well as the frontline tank. In-camp builds tend to work really well in general with Little Fade because she only takes up one capacity, so then you can fit a lot of other units on there. I mean, not with Firelight, but with other builds. In terms of spells, Offering Token to try to get incants, Titan's Tooth for the AoE, Ice Storm for the AoE, and then Preserve. So this is another thing you can do. You can preserve Little Fade, and then if you have Titan's Claws, Little Fade becomes 0 cost. That's another way to get around that opportunity cost of having to play her multiple times. It does mean that you're delayed in playing her, but you can play her for free. And that makes it a lot more manageable and a lot less damaging to be able to play her out for free. And then if you're going to incant at all, Founding Seal is going to be great. And finally, Umbra. With Umbra, just solid blockers. Crucible Warden, Crucible Collector, Shadow Eater. Fit a Morsel Master in there if you can, especially if you have a Warden or a Collector. Shadow Eater is quite good. You just need one morsel or two to kill the back line, and then Little Fade can kill the front line. Cannibalize is pretty good because Cannibalize allows you to kill Little Fade from wherever she is and get a whole bunch of morsels out of her, which can be really valuable early game. Furnace Tap for after she's died enough that you now have her doing damage. Umbra Stone for the same reason. Engine Upgrade is also pretty good because it's a way to just get permanent Ember without having to do much else. I like it a lot more than trying to do it using like Ember generating cards, because Engine Upgrade's like a play and be done, and then now you have an extra Ember for future. If you do an Engine Upgrade, I would say you still stop at around 3 deaths and maybe save a 4th death for after she dies in the first Relentless combat. Artifacts, Mind Jacks, more space, Fossilized Fangs, more Gorge. Pretty standard stuff. Again, the goal with Eternal Flame, you let her die twice or 3 times, you put her behind a big thick tank, and then you just make sure you have solid AoE, because that's going to be one of your big problems is AoE. Frontliners are going to die to Little Fade, backliners are going to be dangerous. And the final upgrade path, Little Icarus. Little Icarus has text, Spikes 1 on Slay. Gain +2 damage and 2 spikes permanently. It is a 5/1 unit, as all Little Fades tend to be. At rank 2, the permanent scaling increases to +3/+3. And at rank 3, it increases to +4/+4. So you can have permanent damage scaling. It's it and Overgorger are the only 2 permanent scaling units in the entire game. And it not only scales damage, it scales spikes, which is quite good. It has innate backline access due to the spikes, and innate damage scaling and spikes are unaffected by Reform and Cleanse, which is kind of cool. Cleanse in particular is a problem for a lot of spike decks. It's actually not for Little Icarus because when you reform her, she comes back with all of her spikes again. So pretty cool, kind of neat. Looking at weaknesses, she's entirely reliant on reform, similar to to Firelight. She's entirely reliant on slay triggers. This becomes very important with how you build around her. Low base health, low base damage, and no innate sustain. Opportunities. High benefit from any spike enhancements. So if you get Gnarled Root or the Crucible, both of them are going to be a huge buff to her in general. Obviously, high benefit from targeted reform, so you can make sure you don't accidentally reform the wrong target. There's a risky benefit from buffs. So it really depends on how you play her. But if you buff at the end when you're no longer expecting her to die, then it can be quite good. But you just have to be aware that any buffs you put on her are going to be lost on death. If you're going to try to sustain her, damage shield and armor are going to be better because both of them, she starts with like basically 1 HP. So damage shield and health are going to be much better. Lifesteal can become relevant after she's died a few times, but honestly, I don't typically ever do lifesteal or regen on her. If I do anything, it's damage shield and armor, and I almost never do anything. I normally just let her die. For threats, slay triggers compete with other unit triggers. This is actually a big deal. You do not want to take other slay units typically because the whole build revolves around her getting as many slay triggers as possible to scale. Lack of targeted reform. And a lot of units in the consume pool. So again, just be cautious about how many units you let die because then they muddy up the reform pool and makes it difficult to pull Little Fade out when you need her. She can die to burnout, which is also a problem. So, you've let her die 3 or 4 times. You reform her, put her on the bottom. She doesn't have enough damage yet to kill the boss. And then she just dies to burnout rather than to damage. That can be an issue. As well as preventing her from getting slay triggers. Maybe she has enough damage, but she burns out, the turn before the boss dies, and somebody else gets the kill instead. Seraph the Patient Cleanse can be problematic, but you just reset it on reform. So as long as you let her die, she'll come back with full stacks of spikes again. I didn't put it in here. Seraph the Diligent is also a problem because of the consume. You can lose all of your reform, and then you can't reform her, which becomes a problem. So how do you play her? Little Icarus, Little Fade is a damage carry with innate backline access due to the permanent scaling damage and spikes. She creates a very unique playstyle. So basically, early on in the fight, the goal is get as many slay triggers as possible. You should be trying to manipulate the floors as well as you can to guarantee she gets slay triggers. Normally, you play her on the front line, and you try to position things like you can actually position it. So let's take for an example. You have those setups where you have a high health frontliner, and then you have a low health midliner, a backliner, maybe a healer in the back, and they have Little Fade. The way you normally want to play that then is you let Little Fade die. You don't put anything behind Little Fade. You put all your other units in the top floor. And then when Little Fade reforms, usually Little Fade will then have enough health to survive the frontline unit and kill the middle unit. Maybe damage the top unit just enough. And then you play it in the top lane again. Hopefully it died or will die to the burnout. And try to get a kill on the top, the frontline unit. So you play it so that as much as you can, try to get kills with her. The best thing you can hope for is getting the 1 health rage units. Man, you can stack a lot of kills, especially if you take the trial to have them start on each floor. Yeah, you can get insane amounts of kills with the spikes very early on. Later on, once the boss comes, then you want to switch and put her on the back line with a tank in front of her, so that she can get the kill with her high damage numbers she's gotten from all of her reform triggers and also from all of her slay triggers. And again, be very careful with having too many units. And the last thing I will note, do not take Ring 1 armor trials. It's not just because they're difficult. in general. I mean, armor trials, the Ring 1 armor trials are the hardest trials, I think. The other part of it is that you can slow down your permanent scaling for the entire rest of the run. Not getting at least like 6 or 7 slate triggers in the first ring will affect you for the entire rest of the run. It's very, very important that you get those kills. So just, I would avoid it. Unless you have a master plan of how you're going to be able to get those kills, I would just avoid armor trials for the first 3 rings. After that, you're going to have plenty of spikes. Then it's fine. But those first 2 rings, do not take armor trials. Is my recommendation. So then, how do you build? I go all in on harvest. I mean, you have a unit that's going to die over and over again. Your backliner is going to take big advantage of that. Wickless Baron's the best one to do because it doesn't really get that much damage unless you put multi-strike on it, so it's less likely to kill units, but it gets really thick, and getting a really thick Wickless Baron means that you have a good tank to put Little Fade on behind after for the relentless combat. Big Sludge also works quite well. Legion of Wax actually works pretty well because it doesn't typically kill a lot of things, but is really, really thick to block for your Little Fade. Lady of the Reformed works quite well because it's also quite thick, and then as well it's going to increase the burnout onto Little Fade during relentless combat. Paraffin Enforcer is also pretty good. Wickless Tycoon tends to be good if you can reliably get enough damage. If you can reliably get enough damage, you're just going to get free coins, which is always good to help your build. Get you good relics, get you good spell upgrades. Priority spells, Molded, Wicked Blaze. Very important. Now, Wicklash is quite good as well because Wicklash allows you to extend the burnout during relentless combat, and also that damage increase gets carried over through reforms. But yeah, number 1 priority, get targeted reform. It's super important. I don't like Endless on Little Icarus because you don't get any health, and the health becomes very important to get multiple kills with spikes. So I would avoid Endless, in my opinion. I would prefer Moldeds and Wicked Blazes because then you get extra health, giving you more chance to kill things with your spikes, which is how you get multiple kills. Yes, you can get high damage and then kill with the high damage, but the high spikes means, you know, every unit on the floor dies to Little Fade, and that's where you start getting sick slate triggers. Wickless Recruitment can also be good. You get Permafrost on it, and you just kind of wait until the end of the battle, and then you play it onto Little Fade to make sure she's not going to die to burnout. Subsuming Blade can also be pretty good. There's kind of 2 purposes for it. One is you can get in these weird situations where Little Fade doesn't die when you need her to, and then you could Subsuming Blade her to make sure she's dying. I actually do this a lot, where I use Subsuming Blade not to kill her, but to lower her health enough to die, so that then I can reform her for the next turn. Mortal Entrapment's also really good for endless combat. I don't typically like any kind of stealth because you want things to hit her, and stealth prevents them from hitting her. I find that she gets most of her kill triggers with the spikes over the damage. Looking at artifacts, Resin Block, really good. Give her more damage. Make it more likely that she's the one that's going to kill the bosses. Flicker's Liquor, if you're going to have a reformed unit every turn, that's going to make a free spell every turn. It's quite good. Combustible Wax can work. You got to be careful about it, but it's good if you don't have any other way to extend burnout. Combustible Wax can be a godsend. The only issue is if you're not dying to damage, Combustible Wax means that Little Fade might not die when you need her to. And then Mold Braces. If you're going to have Little Fade die so much, why not let her buff a unit behind her? Looking at other clans, big thick tanks are the answer here. Demon Fiend tends to be quite good. You just have to increase your Ember once, but I think that's worth it for a 50 health unit to block for her. Welder Helper, Transcend Imp to get any type of scaling. I mean, imp builds in general, we talked about it. Imp builds are really good with Harvest. So you can also just go a full imp build with a Wickless Baron or a Big Sludge. Outside of that, it's all about sustain. You want to get as much sustain as possible onto your tank in preparation for relentless combat. So Branding Right's really good, March of Shields, Alloy of the Ancients. And then for artifacts, increasing the sustain with Railhammer, and then Ashes of the Fallen to get double summon triggers. With Awoken, I love Vine Mother. I actually put Vine Mother as a tank because Vine Mother doesn't kill things. It's a thick unit that won't steal slay triggers. It also provides you with stings, which allow you to get... you can manipulate numbers so that you're more likely to kill things with your Little Fade, which tends to be really valuable. Like little bits of damage manipulation can go a long way. Awoken Hollow is quite good because it also typically isn't going to kill still from your Little Fade. Thorned Hollow is dangerous, but if you really don't have any other tank, it can work. You could also, and maybe it's even better, you could do Husk Hermit. The problem with Husk Hermit is that it is also a sweep unit. But regardless, you just want a tank in front. Maybe the best would actually be then the... what is it called? The... is it the Sapling? Is that what it's called? The other hollow that I can't think of the name of right now. Anyway, if you get the other hollow, the one that gives you extra ember, that could also work. Maybe that's even better than Thorned Hollow because it's also less likely to kill still. Outside of that, priority spells, Cycle of Life is really good because you get extra spikes and you get extra health onto Little Fade, making it more likely that she kills things with her spikes. Awake for your tank, Wildwood Sap for your tank. And then finally, the best artifacts for Little Icarus, Petrified Crucible and Gnarled Root. Both of them are amazing on her, making it more likely that she gets spike kills or her spikes also give her damage, both of which are fantastic for her. Stygian Guard. I like, again, units that aren't going to kill steal from your Little Fade. A Guard of the Unnamed tends to be really good. Guardian Stone as well. Siren of the Seas also pretty good. I mean, any incanter can work, but really you want one that's going to get tanky. So things that are going to scale incant with tanks. The other nice thing you can do then is that you can use your reform spells on your incant floor and then play your Little Fade wherever you need her. And then if you're going to incant, go all in, but try not to kill things with spells if you can. Try to get all your kills with Little Fade, especially early on. Once you get into like rings 7 and 8, like it doesn't matter so much anymore. But rings 1 through 5, like get as many kills as you can. You really need to scale up. My rule of thumb is you need to be able to kill a frontliner with spikes for Seraph, and that means 120 spikes as a minimum. So that's your target, 120 spikes by ring 8, and that's a lot. That's a lot of slay triggers you're going to need. For artifacts, then Founding Seal and Titan's Claws. Titan's Claws just make anything permafrost, and then yeah, it becomes 0 cost, and that becomes really valuable for incant builds. Even something like Deep Offering, you get permafrost on it, and then it becomes free as a free incant that draws 5 cards. For Umbra, I really like these kind of like really strong, fat Gorgers. So Overgorger, Shadow Eater. You can also do Shadow Siege. Again, just be careful that they're not kill stealing, but Overgorger tends to be really good. Then you have 2 permanently scaling units that don't conflict with each other. In preparation for the final rings. For spells, Cannibalize is really good. Blazing Bolts is really good for some frontline burst. And then Mind Collapse can also be useful to just kind of pick off backline enemies. For artifacts, I like Mind Jacks a lot. Refined Void is also really good because every time you bring her back, she's going to come back with extra lifesteal. And the higher that gets, the better. You could also take, what's it called? I can't think of what it's called. It's the oh my gosh, my brain just died. It's the Chain of Gems. Chain of Gems can also work really well. Chain of Gems is also good with spikes because then you can get hit and those spikes are going to kill things more often. Maybe Chain of Gems is even better. Maybe it's on par. But Refined Void, Chain of Gems, either one of those are going to be really good because you get them every time you reform. And specifically with Cannibalize, the reason why Cannibalize is so good is because you can kill and then reform Little Fade. And if Little Fade's on the wrong floor, you can kill her and reform her very easily. Plus, you're getting out of it morsels. And yeah, so that's it. Oh, let me talk about this actually before we move on. So basically the idea with Little Fade is you try to not steal kills from her. That's the goal. The goal is to get as many kills as Little Fade as you can while making sure you're able to kill the frontline units. Backline's typically okay. At a certain point, you have enough health that the spikes are killing the backliners. It's really the frontliners that are scary. So you should think about, how am I going to kill the frontliners? But otherwise, you just need sustain on your tank, and as much as you can, manipulate floors so that Little Icarus is killing as many things as possible. So, flexing and rankings. In terms of upgrade paths, Firelight and Eternal Flame want to go to rank 3 every time. The rank 3 is just too good to pass up on both of them. The huge amount of damage you get on Eternal Flame and the huge amount of damage you get on Extinguish for Firelight you don't want to pass them up for anything else. Little Icarus, what I tend to do is go rank 2, and then you can either finish off with rank 3 or you can switch. If you do switch, you don't need that many. You don't need that much spikes. It's more than that you can get either a support, so then you get Firelight to add support to the units behind Little Fade, or you get Eternal Flame to scale up the damage and also make it endless. Personal ranking, Firelight, you just take it. If it's offered, you take it. It's currently, as of November 12th, when I'm recording this, Firelight is just so much better. It's so much better than any other champion build, but it's so much better than the other two paths. You just take it. And then outside of that, if you don't have it, I normally take Little Icarus over Eternal Flame. I think it's a little bit easier to play around. And it's kind of fun. I think Little Icarus is fun. It's a fun little puzzle of how to not only, defeat each ring, but how to get the most kills as you possibly can with Little Fade. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are done with the guide. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate the support. I hope this has been helpful for you guys. I've really enjoyed making it, even though it's certainly been a lot more work than I was expecting. If you've read or heard me talk about it before, I thought this was going to be a 2-hour video for the entire review, but then I decided I would really go deep into deck building. I hope that was valuable. I hope turning this from a 2-hour series to a, what is it now? More than 6 hours, almost 7-8 hours series. That it was helpful and beneficial. If you did like this video, please subscribe if you have not already. Give it a like. Comment below. Tell me, out of any of the guides that I've done so far, what would you do differently? What have you been doing that's been successful that maybe I didn't cover? Name of the day is my own name, Nate. If you watch me on stream, I do name of the days. If you watch me on YouTube, you probably don't get too much of that. But you can also call me Nate. You can always call me Nate. You can always call me Nathan. Please don't call me Nathaniel, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.